Broadcasting from Millennium Student Center at the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and online at umslradio.org. We are the voice of UMSL. We are UMSL Radio.
The opinions expressed on this program are the views of the host and not necessarily the views of the University of Missouri St. Louis or this station.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another installment of That Science and Nature Show. Joining me this week, we have Eunice Kahn.
Hello.
Sebastian Forward.
Hello, everyone.
And Becky Hansis O'Neill.
Hello.
So, this week, we're going to talk all about baseball, which is not something I thought we'd talk about for the news. We're going to talk about tree bridges, and we're going to talk about wet wipes. And for our conversation topic of the week, we're going to talk all about why is science not very interesting to everyone out there, which is a shame because we're on a science podcast, and science is a lot of fun. But first, it is the end of March Mammal Madness. That competition we did like 5 weeks ago. We filled out our brackets and all that stuff. So last week, we talked all about the semifinals, which was the Okapi, the Rock Hyrax, the Wolverine, and the Golden Eagle. And then the top two who went to the finals were the Okapi and the Wolverine. And claiming the victor for March Mammal Madness for 2023 was, in fact, the Wolverine.
It's fair.
Did they give a weird scenario where a Wolverine managed to kill an Okapi?
I did not read the breakdown. However, you can go to the March Mammal Madness website on Arizona State University and read all about the exact battle and how it played out. So,
fearsome creatures, Wolverines. There.
Do we believe this outcome? Were we expecting the Okapi to take it all the way?
Yeah, I would have.
Yeah, I don't know. The Okapi's got reach, but the Wolverine can go for the ankles, so I guess it makes sense.
All right. Well, that pretty much wraps up March Mammal Madness. So the Wolverine took the cake, and it's going to get its face and body on a box of Wheaties like all the other winners. So you can look forward to that, seeing that on the line on the internet. But now we're on to the news. So our first story this week comes from BBC News, and we're going to talk all about wet wipes. So, like I said, this comes from BBC News, and the title of this article is Plastic Wet Wipes Ban Planned in England to Tackle Pollution. So basically, England wants to get rid of heavy plasticky wet wipes in order to prevent future and current sewage cloggage, because a lot of the rivers in England are very polluted, which I was not surprised by, but I didn't realize all of them were so horrible. But yeah, the crux is that England government wants to ban the plastic wet wipes, and they're kind of getting some pushback from companies and also from environmental groups. So pushback from all sides, which is an interesting conundrum to be in. You're on no one's favor there. But yeah, what do we think about the wet wipes and the banning and the rivers?
I mean, it makes sense to me what's going on here. It's like the local municipalities say, we have to pay every time these things clog the sewers or their local water companies to fix it. But the people that make the wet wipes obviously don't want to stop making them and mess up with their supply chains. And then environmentalists are like, don't claim this is an environmental issue. You're just sick of paying to fix the sewer.
Yeah, you'd want to say that this is all about, single-use plastics and the things that we as a society should really try and avoid because, it's a really inefficient way of using fossil fuels and also really contributes to, all the plastic in the ocean and everything like that. But, yeah, once again, there's a reason why we use so much plastic, and it's because it's really cheap, and I think this definitely boils down to the, whatever you throw in the drain really does impact the actual, city, because the city has to pay to fix all these problems. So I agree that it's probably, the maintenance people are sick of dealing with this, so you can't really claim it's about the plastic necessarily, but less plastic is kind of always good.
Did you guys... This made me think of when, back in the day before I was not as informed, when I used to pour oil down the drain from, fatty foods and stuff, and I didn't realize that actually clogged
Oh yeah, that's bad. Don't
Yeah.
pour grease down the drain.
I found that out a couple years ago. Not that I was doing it like intentionally. It's just I had no idea. I was like, oh, this actually kind of congeals and clogs everything and makes everything worse.
Yeah, there are many rules that nobody like tells you. There's you don't have to watch a documentary to use a sink. So yeah, there's things that you don't learn until either you screw up your own plumbing and then you have to pay someone to fix it, or you never learn and you contribute to the problem.
As an 18-year-old, I put liquid Dawn in the dishwasher. That's my claim to fame.
Ooh.
All right, I'm ignorant. You have to explain to me why that's bad.
If you put dish soap in your dishwasher, it's a different kind of detergent, and you will get bubbles all over your kitchen and a huge mess.
Okay, I feel like I've seen that scenario play out in sitcoms before.
Did you turn your bathroom into a bubble bath, or your kitchen into a bubble bath?
I did. It was a mess. It was terrible.
Yeah. So I think it looks like this wet wipes is like a big problem, because 93% of the sewer blockages, including the so-called fatbergs, basically it is clogged by these wet wipes, and it costs the Britain economy like £100 million a year. But one thing which I didn't understand, I would be curious to know your opinion about, is that why these different stakeholders, they're like not on the same page about it. Do you think it's just the politics and they just don't want to give each other the credit? Or like the opposition has this valid point that they think that whatever the government is proposing to do, like banning the wet wipes, it is like not enough or not too early?
I'd have to say, I think if we could stop those blockages in any municipality where this is a problem, not just in Britain, that's probably going to have good outcomes in terms of environmental impacts if sewer systems are working how they're supposed to work. But I could see if you're a manufacturer of wet wipes changing, because I think that was the ban, is that you can't use plastics in the wet wipes.
Right.
So you can still make them, you just can't use all those plastics. They need to be degradable once they're in the sewer system. That's expensive. So, and we're talking about companies, if you were in the United States, probably, I'm going to misspeak, but big ones like Johnson & Johnson, things like that, have a lot of these household products. That's a lot of lobbying power, and I expect it's the same way in Britain. In terms of environmental pushback, it's not all one big slice of pie, and if we fix the wet wipe problem, we can't save the oceans. So I kind of don't agree with that pushback personally.
I think a lot of the times when you see like environmentalists are mad about this because it's not going far enough, or it's not banning all single-use plastics. So some folks are against it, and I think it really it misses the point that it's hard to change anything as an improvement, and you can't always solve the entire issue at once. So I think I would disagree with anyone who is opposed to the idea of removing plastics from, like, the sewage system. That seems kind of like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, I mean, reading the article, I also kind of got that impression that whatever the people who are opposing the use of plastic in, like, the ban basically on the use of plastic in wet wipes, I feel like it is more like politically motivated, because even the article, it doesn't mention any valid reason. Like, for example, if they say it is too late, I mean, what is too late? Like, we have to start from somewhere. So even if it is like a small step, it should be appreciated. And on the other side, like, I don't see any substantial, like, suggestion regarding improving the situation. So it looks like there is a lot of politics being, played around into it. How do you think about it?
As there often is, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, all right, that's going to conclude the wet wipes talk for sewers and all that jazz. Now we're going to move on to our second article, which this comes to us from Smithsonian Magazine, and we're going to talk about baseball. And the title of this article is "Climate Change is Making Home Runs Easier to Hit." Now, if you had told me, or if you had asked me rather, what are the most important things that climate change impacts, baseball would have not cracked the top 10. But according to this article from Smithsonian Magazine, researchers have found by looking at all this statistical data on the Earth getting warmer from global warming and greenhouse gases, is all this baseball data on terms of home runs and how warm it was on that day at the field, and all that stuff. They basically found this link between days where it's increasingly hot, which cause the air molecules to become less dense, so they're not as packed. So in turn, what this does is this provides less resistance to the ball in the air. So you have friction on the ground that acts to prevent motion on things that are, solid. But when something flies through the air, drag kind of acts as a friction of the air, if you will. So less dense particles, less drag. This means less resistance for the ball to encounter. So when it is hit, there's not as much resistance to stop it from flying further away. So researchers have basically found that with the warming temperatures, more athletes are hitting home runs in the 2010 to 2019 years, I believe the article stated. So that was kind of weird. That's my first thought. Are we big baseball fans here? Are we big sports fans?
No.
No, I will admit to that.
I mean, but the article in itself is like very interesting because like when I was reading it, I kind of got very mixed feeling about it. Number one, as you mentioned, if I'm thinking about global warming, I would never have thought like it will come into play in the home run situation. But again, it points to the fact that global warming is impacting our lives in so many ways. Some ways they are very crucial and that we should think about that are basically like crucial for our survival as human species. But there are some other things that it might be changing, and this is more of like an example of that. So I really found the article very interesting.
I'll say that I'm kind of curious about their statistics because I know as a whole, sports always trends upwards, like, as people get better and as there become more people in the world, there become more athletes, and when you have more athletes, you have a higher chance of having someone hit that, extreme fastest shot or whatever. So I know that the global trend for all the sports is things are always getting better, and the likelihood of these things happening is always increasing. So I'm wondering, I have no doubt that it makes a difference, but I'm wondering how much of a difference. So like a couple percent, and will this impact the sport at all?
So you can write a counter paper that says the contributions of both globalization and climate change to sports records.
Yes.
There, new title.
I feel like that would be a hard calculation to make, but you would kind of have to make that calculation.
Just throw principal component analysis at it. And for those of you that aren't familiar with principal component analyses, they kind of take lots of different variables and they'll smush them into single variables called components. And we often joke about them and go, what is a principal component?
It is magic. Magic of statistics.
I mean, the article does say, 2010 to 2019, and it represents around 1% of the typical MLB season's total home runs. So it's not like it's an overwhelming amount of home runs that are being hit with this correlation with global warming and, balls getting hit out of the park. It's not crazy. I mean, it's noticeable, but I wouldn't say it's a crazy high.
Yeah, that is true. And one component I was specifically looking for in the article was that how do they take into account the other factors that might have contributed to increased home runs. And I think Sebastian raised a very good point. So I think in the article they mentioned that other things, for example, the athletes they have been using like more scientifically based strategies, or like as Sebastian mentioned, that the game generally goes upward no matter what the sports is. So they kind of bring those factors into their simulations. So I still don't know like how much actually the global warming might have contributed to this 1% increase in the home runs, but it was good to see, at least from a scientist's point of view, that they took into account many of those factors that might have led to a general increase in the number of home runs.
One thing that this made me think of is a thing I heard about pole vaulting a long time ago. You know, the sport with a pole where you like jump and try and make it over the other pole. It's fairly straightforward.
Thank you for explaining pole vaulting to the audience.
Yes. Okay, I don't know how to explain pole vaulting. It's weird, but it turns out that, you know, you're basically just fighting against gravity. It's like, how far can you jump in this sport? And where you are on the planet impacts how much gravity you're experiencing. Because if you're on the top of a mountain or in a really high elevation place, you're farther away from the Earth, so gravity is like a little bit less than if you're like way down at sea level and you're kind of closer to the core of the Earth. And as it turns out, the difference between this thing can be like an inch. And when you're talking like Olympic sports, these people are winning by millimeters or something like that. Like the margins are absolutely tiny on these professional sports. So the fact that if the same people did the same thing at a lower elevation, you could have a really significantly different, you know, result just based on wherever the competition was held.
So like with the Olympics, based on where it is, you know, each 4 years, that could impact how well someone does?
Yep. Yeah, overall it impacts the ease of the sport and, you know, how much people have to fight against gravity to get off the ground.
So that's very interesting. And speaking of the climate change and its impact on the future home runs, the paper they also like did some calculations. Basically, they simulated the expected home runs attributed to increased temperature by the year 2100. And the scientists, they think that the increase in the number of home runs which can be attributed to this increased temperature would be 10% by 2180.
Wow.
So I think in that case it becomes very significant. Like how then you are gonna compare, say, the all-time greats of a sport, because then of course to the homers like situation or condition would be more suitable.
I think it's worth adding on that eventually it gets so hot that the games themselves become uncomfortable. The article also cited newer stadiums that actually have giant air conditioning systems in their big domes. They're not technically outside, or moving games to nighttime because they're getting hot enough that, especially at risk populations, people can get heat exhaustion and heat stroke. So this problem might take care of itself. That's not the right word.
No. They might spend billions of dollars to counteract the problem with engineering. Oof. Yeah, the home run percentage drops off extremely quickly when everyone gets heat stroke and dies on the field. So, yeah, I can imagine there would be incentives to prevent that.
How dystopian.
Yes.
I mean, it will be interesting to see if, you know, we start having AC cooled stadiums in the future. Will this, you know, trend drop off? Will that 1% just kind of fizzle away? Who knows?
Interesting.
Speaking to what Eunice said, maybe we're seeing the highest that they'll ever be. The records are all happening now.
So, you know, if you're gunning to be a Major League Baseball player, now's your chance. There's a higher percent of hitting home runs because of global warming, so you got to go for it now.
And on a lighter note, I feel like only the baseball players, they're going to be the only people who are going to be happy about the global warming. So for them, is it a blessing in disguise? Who knows?
So celebrate the small victories as the world burns.
All right, and on that note, I think we're going to move on to the third article. All right, so, okay. So this article comes to us from Atlas Obscura. So Atlas Obscura is kind of a website that's a bit devoted to travel things, but also just really kind of highlighting very peculiar, weird things. I don't use
It's a great site.
It is a great site. This is also why I'm using it. But it's not, I don't use it quite as much as the other sites because usually it isn't always news. Sometimes it's just like interesting things to check out. But occasionally they have cool news stories like this one. And this one is all about tree bridges, which sounds really boring, but stick with me. It's super cool. So the title of the article is "The Artisans Behind India's Living Wood Bridges." So the idea here is they talk about this Indian individual who is from the Khasi tribe named Halli War, who basically, as part of their cultural tradition, they build these giant tree bridges, which involve manipulating these fig trees to kind of weave the roots together to make a bridge. I feel like I'm poorly explaining this, but think of it kind of like basket weaving, but for bridge making, is the most simple way I can put it. But basically, this is something that's been passed on from generation to generation to generation, and they have made these beautiful, ginormous bridges. I'm not even sure what you should Google to find this, but I feel like we should tell the audience something to Google to find this.
I'll say this phenomenon kind of comes down to a really unique property of fig trees, and it's like a whole bunch of different kinds. There's like thousands of species of figs, other than the one that might show up in the grocery store sometime. But kind of most of the species have the ability to actually fuse together. Their trunks will kind of like melt into each other, and they'll eventually form just kind of one individual or one chunk. And they take advantage of this with these bridges by taking, I think it probably has to be two parts of the same tree on either side of the river, and they bend these trees over until they can like tie them together in the middle, and then over generations, over years, the trees keep growing as they span the river, and they keep kind of shaping them so that it turns it into a walkway, and they fuse together into one, like, I'll say, really structurally sound bridge. Like, this is, compared to what you can have with ropes, this is like an entire tree, coming from both sides.
Yeah, Google living root bridges, and you'll get a picture of them in India. They're super cool and super beautiful.
I want one.
You want one? How much for a root bridge, please?
Can we order it off of Amazon or something?
Well, you all might be able to do those things, but how many hundreds of years does it take to make one?
Yeah. It would take the rest of my life.
More.
Yes, it would.
So I really like how some people are so dedicated. They know that the bridge will not be ready in like just a year or two. It takes basically their whole lifetime. And even after that, the tree roots keep growing. But still, some people are so dedicated to their culture and to their heritage and to humanity as well, that they keep working towards these kind of goals. So I think it's really, really worth appreciating.
Yeah, it's definitely something I would absolutely go visit.
Yeah, I think I don't know, it lends itself, like one of these really beautiful, like, naturalistic engineering things. If there's, I am a personal big fan of tree houses, and sometimes that may or may not actually be a good idea, because tree houses can be kind of dangerous. But I think this is a really smart way to use the tree, where these are probably way safer than like a sketchy rope bridge that's gonna like weaken over time. And this is in a rainforest area, so you can't really have metal last very long out here. So I think it's a really cool way of making something that actually gets stronger over time, as opposed to something that you'd have to replace, which is pretty sustainable.
So they mentioned that because concrete and metal are so fast to put up, that often communities will opt for a faster bridge, even if in the long term it's a less sustainable bridge. Also, these look very well engineered for people and maybe small carts, but not...
True, yeah, probably not good for a car.
Yeah.
Not going to drive a car across a tree bridge.
But it raises a point of how can we create incentives to keep this sort of really wonderful essentially biophilic knowledge around. Like, I wouldn't want to see these disappear, or the practices to make them.
It's true. How do we feel about ecotourism? It can be a double-edged sword when it comes to trying to preserve things by making there be an incentive for like weirdos like us to go pay money and visit, because it can go both ways.
I've definitely participated in ecotourism where I'm like, this was not what I thought this was going to be like, and maybe I don't want to support this exact thing. So yeah, that's definitely a double-edged sword.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, so I did like a bird eco tour down near the Yucatan, where there was a lot of ecotourism, and we run around on a boat and visit some birds, and then the guide said, hey, there's iguanas here. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And he said, I'll show you. And he pulled out a bag of chips and started crinkling the chip bag, and the iguanas came running, and he was like handing them chips. I was like, this isn't my ethos. I don't want to give the iguanas chips.
Were they Doritos, or what kind of brand are we talking? You had to fill in the gaps with the story.
I want to say they were some kind of potato chip.
Okay.
Feeding Lays to iguana, not the most normal nature relationship with wild animals, but.
So the next time I'm in the Yucatan, I know to bring the Lays and not, the Fritos.
If you want to see the iguanas. But we also did a whale shark, like, snorkeling thing, and what they don't show you is there's like 20 boats, and they're all like chaining in front of the sharks. So even if it's not altering the feeding behavior of the sharks, the gasoline and the diesel and the noise. So it's really easy to accidentally create an ecotourism area where you're hurting and you're not helping. And I unfortunately have participated in some that I would not participate in again.
I think the ecotourism kind of comes in as like the middle step of like how to protect nature, because it's kind of always better to just like make a preserve and not bother the nature and just kind of have it all be for conservation or for preservation. But it's a lot harder to get that to happen because there's basically no economic incentive to just put a fence around something and say nobody can mess with it. So a lot of times you have to make things like a like tourist ecotourism or something where you can get money from people visiting, and that's the only way to make it more economically viable than like hunting everything or like logging the forest or something like that. So I think there's kind of steps, and hopefully eventually you don't have to have the ecotourism, but I feel like it's better than the alternatives that are kind of actually destroying everything.
Yeah, and we might want, well, not we might, really the folks that should get to initiate this are the people that make and maintain the bridges.
Yeah.
And what benefits could they gain from tourism, or is it even appropriate? Because I saw there were some very specific religious ceremonies and essentially rules about who and how these bridges are maintained. So, yeah, I think we'd also need to ask them.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah. So I think what I found really interesting is that there are 72 bridges and other living root structure, especially in the Indian state of Meghalaya. And some of them are like 500 years old. So I think it would be really amazing to see those structures which are like hundreds of years old. And one initiative I think the Indian government is taking is in regard to preserving the tradition and the bridges themselves, is that they're asking UNESCO to accept these bridges as the World Heritage.
That's a
And
great
I think
idea.
it would be a deal breaker, because it truly is a universal heritage of all the mankind. And for the generations to come, like, it's not just a means of transportation. Maybe for the local people it might be, but there are so many religious and spiritual things associated with it that it gives it like a whole new level of significance.
Well said. All right, that's going to wrap up the news. So we will be right back after this to talk about topic of the show on why is science so boring, at least to everyone else not in this room.
Don't put it that way.
Stay tuned.
The music Broadcasting from Millennium Student Center at the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and online at umslradio.org. We are the voice of UMSL. We are UMSL Radio.
All right, now it's time for topic of the show. So, last week, myself, Sebastian, and Andrea talked all about misinformation in science and ways that citizens and individuals, smack the mic, individuals and citizens can get involved with educating themselves more and distinguishing, real articles from fake articles. Eunice and Becky, we played a fun game called Real or Fake, where I read news article titles, and Andrea and Sebastian had to tell me if it was a real story or a fake story.
How'd they do?
They actually got almost all of them right. I think you guys were split on one answer. One of you said yes, one of you said no. I think Sebastian got all of them. I think Andrea missed one of them. So they did a really good job. And they weren't easy. This week I do not have a fun quiz, unfortunately. But the idea for this topic came basically over the weekend when I'm going to go on a tangent, so stick with me. When I was watching this show on Netflix called Kunk on Earth, which is a British mockumentary series where this woman, her character's name is Philomena Kunk, basically gives a history of something, and she makes a lot of fun of academics and sort of how history is presented. And it's very tongue-in-cheek, and it's very dry. It's also absolutely hilarious, and you should totally watch it. And I was watching some behind the scenes on it for the actress who plays Philomena. Her name's Diane Morgan. She's a British comedian. And one of the reasons she just is really interested in sort of making these mockumentaries is because she just finds history so boring that these sort of mockumentaries are ways to get people to somewhat pay attention. And even though, she gets a lot of details wrong, the general arc is not terribly off. In terms of telling you about how the way the world works, there's just lots of, shallow comparisons and quibs and stuff to make things more entertaining. But she was saying, history she finds so incredibly boring, and that kind of made me think about science and science documentaries and communicating science and all that stuff. And just a lot of people don't find science that interesting. I know Andrea and Sebastian gave a lot of great information on looking into peer review articles and talking to professional scientists. My knee-jerk reaction at the time was, I don't think most people are going to do that because they don't want to, or they're just not interested, or they don't know how. And I guess to kind of kick off the topic in terms of science and disinterest in science and all that is, where do you think this disinterest comes from? Or why do people find science boring?
Well, I'll admit as a scientist that I don't even want to do that. Even if I find a paper that's about something I'm really interested in, I still have to sit down. I have to interpret all of their graphs. I have to go through their introduction and conclusions and make sure they make sense. That's a huge investment. And that's my career. I don't know if the rest of you have similar feelings about reading articles.
I think that, this is why we have science communication and why we have, science experts in communication to make these things interesting. Because, it's, very few people on this world read scientific papers for, just straight up fun. Not many people do that. Most people find them very dry, and, the format of science is not supposed to be exciting. And I think that's kind of part of it, is the fundamental idea of science is we think we have this information, we're not sure if it's 100% true, we've tried out some of the other things, and we think that they're not true, so this is why we strongly suggest that this idea may be the way that, something is. And it's not flashy, it's not we know the answer, we've discovered this, we're confident about it. And I think that's why things get so easily misconstrued in the media, is, science is very cautious, very hesitant to make big claims, because big claims require a lot of evidence. So I think that's kind of the divide that we run into a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think one of the reasons why people find science boring is that they don't have access to those journals, which in particular basically explains these scientific papers in a layman's term. So, for example, Science or Nature, but who has access to those papers or those journals? So I feel like one way we can counter this problem is to give people access, and this is why a lot of these academic journals are now switching to open access. But again, the problem remains the same, because even if people have access to them and there is a lot of jargon and technicality involved, still it won't solve the issue. So I feel like these big names, these big journals, which people even know about, most people know about, but there is no way, they're not highly accessible to people.
Nature has, as a publisher, does have a lot of lay people articles. It's just separate from the actual journal Nature. So as a publisher, they do have a lot of stuff. But yeah, I still think the technicality stuff is boring, even for topics that we all really like.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys mentioned the accessibility. So you think your average Joe with just a high school degree or a college degree and not science is going to go to a Science and Nature professional journal if they had access? Because I would be willing to say, no, they will not.
This is why we have documentaries, and this is why we have documentaries made by credible sources, because unfortunately anyone can make a documentary, and this is one of the problems. And there's an entire genre for I guess cryptozoology, fake biology documentaries, and fake history documentaries. There's a whole series up on Netflix about fake archaeology that's just pure misinformation, and it's most distilled form of just not correct information, but legitimate sources like National Geographic, Nova, things like that. Those documentaries are explicitly made for everyone, and they provide. I think one of the most boring things about science is how few pictures there are in scientific publications. It's all text.
I was so happy. Sebastian and I had to read a paper about radiation effects on frogs near Chernobyl and how their colors changed. And there were beautiful frog pictures. I was very happy. Yeah. I mean, there are efforts to combat this. If you get a big NSF, so National Science Foundation grant in the United States, there's a section of the grant you have to write called Broader Impacts. And there's a specific amount of the budget and part of your project that must be dedicated to science communication. And those are what is called broader impacts. So you could fund a museum exhibit, you could do a mini documentary, all kinds of stuff like that. You could become, outside of NSF, a Nat Geo Explorer if you do a lot of field work. Actually, you should look into this.
Yeah.
And get your work out that way. So there is a lot of really good work on trying to make science more mainstream and accessible.
I think I'm just kind of honing in on this idea that is it just because science is a text-based thing and people don't read anymore because we have so many other things to do and so many other things to watch?
So if you listen to your textbook on audiobook, would that be better?
I have tried doing audio to read me papers. It doesn't work any better.
It's hard. But watching documentaries is easy. And that's where I learned everything as a kid, was documentaries. Is this the reason? Is just because we none of us read anymore?
I don't think that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with those points, but I personally have experienced that there are certain sciences which are more attractive to people and there are some which are not. For example, I am from physics and astronomy background, and when I tell someone about physics, they're more oh, we had physics, we didn't like it in high school or in college. But when I say the same thing about astronomy, they're tell us more about it. What are black holes? Why didn't aliens visit us? And they all of a sudden become so curious. So that makes me think that, okay, maybe certain sciences or certain fields of sciences, they're inherently attractive. And we can easily present them. We have some cool picture from recent James Webb Space Telescope. And no matter where you put them, people will read them, people will watch the documentaries on those. But if, for example, there is a topic or subject, it is called statistical mechanics, and a lot of research is going on in that. And I find statistics extremely boring. So how do you make those things or those research or those fields attractive to people. I think it's going to be very challenging. So that's like an open question to me.
Is it because we can take pictures and make documentaries about space, but you can't take pictures of physics? Is that why?
Yeah, I mean that is the reason, but it doesn't mean that like the people shouldn't know about it, like physics. And I know in physics there are some cool topics like quantum mechanics, quantum entanglement, stuff like that. But still, like if you talk about say thermodynamics, if you talk about like electrodynamics, these are the things that are happening at the electronic or like the molecular level, and they involve a lot of like mathematics, and that mathematics can become extremely ugly, I would say. So I'm just thinking, like for a scientist, those things are still very fascinating, but still there is this inherent bias, between some of the sciences that are already very attractive to the audience or to the general public, and some that they are not.
Yeah, from what I've observed, we're obviously a science and nature show, so we can talk about like lots of pretty things out there and kind of our connection with nature and all of that. I think that's easier for the average Joe to connect to because most likely they have interacted with a plant or an animal, so they can fathom what that is. You guys were talking about your Chernobyl paper with frogs, and there were all the pretty pictures of frogs. If the paper was just about like radioactive decay, it was like that probably wouldn't be as exciting. I mean, they could probably show you a picture of a reactor, but I don't know if that would like spike your interest all of a sudden. So I do agree with Eunice's idea that there are certain things that are more exciting and appealing. I think for physics, at least for me, when I took physics in college, there was like a physics fun night, and they did all like the wacky, cool experiments, like person who lays on nail bed, and then like the stuff with the dry ice and all that. I thought that was kind of a cool, fun, interactive way to get those concepts across through sort of a theatrical, for lack of a better word, interactive experience versus like pretty picture. Because
Baseball.
Yes, I will say, just imagine if your favorite sport, if all you knew about your favorite sport was like the text describing what was happening in the sports game. If it was just like the words that the announcer was calling out during the thing, if your understanding of that sport was just reading the text of the things that were occurring in that sports game,
So
wouldn't that be boring?
those are some scenarios where people get nuts over really boring stats. It's going to be like sports, fantasy sports leagues, gambling. Like, there are reasons people will get into boring stats and do complicated stuff.
I feel like it's because you're watching something move. It's like if you're just reading about a snow leopard, that's gonna be super boring unless you're watching like the video of it happening before your eyes. I feel like we need the sports equivalent of science to like get people's attention.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I will just take maybe a minute to explain this point, that sometimes when we try to make things very interesting, I have seen this in my field a lot. Like the authors, they kind of exaggerate things, and they kind of, misinform people as well in a way. So the description is not very accurate. So again, this is also a question that for a layman, in order to arouse their curiosity, is it a good strategy to make things interesting at the expense of things being accurate? I will give you a quick example. Like recently we were observing a comet, and it was visiting the inner solar system basically after 50,000 years. And that is kind of common for us because there are billions of comets and dozens of them visit us each year, and a lot of them have like this orbital period of 50,000 years, even millions of years, some of them. But all of a sudden I could see like hundreds of articles literally within the span of say 1 month, which said, oh, a mysterious green comet is visiting us after 50,000 years, and they were creating this buzz. So I feel like sometimes it more becomes like a clickbaity things where people are trying to just sell their product at the expense of scientific accuracy. So how do you think should there be like a balance between the two? How would you balance this thing, the accuracy and the exciting part of it?
This is what I had to do for my last job when I was working for company making museum and like zoo exhibits, so it was a lot of science-based
So you
stuff.
sold the lie, is what I'm hearing?
No. You had to, often in our contract, it would say, the text you're writing for this exhibit needs to be at a 5th grade reading level. Or 6th grade, if you're real lucky. Most people write between 9th and 12th grade, I find. Scientists a little bit higher. So what you do is you work with people that are really knowledgeable about the science, and you have a back and forth editing session. Yes, this is okay to say, no, that isn't. But to Eunice's point, if you don't have a client interested in science education, if you're a journalism outlet and you're funded by advertisers, there's no motivation for you to balance reading level and accuracy with an expert. So I think it depends on the venue, but depending on the team, you can get really good at that. So there are people that can do it.
Mm-hmm. It just takes, special attention to making sure that it's accurate, which, unfortunately, if you're not looking at a super credible source, then they just won't bother. But that's why, I like to trust things that come out of the like, I don't know, National Geographic or something like that. Like, I feel like their whole thing is trying to balance the hype and the actual scientific accuracy.
So Becky, just out of curiosity, what was the most challenging thing you had to convert to an exhibit that was like very high level, or just it had to have a lot of rewrites to get it to that 5th grade level? Obviously, you're putting on the spot for years of your work. But...
No, yeah, I'm trying to think, like, did I sign an NDA on that? Yeah, I'll just be really general about it. So about dams and how dams work and how ecological effects on the ecosystem downstream of dams work, especially... Yeah, so that was writing that had to go from my desk to specialists with the client I was working for, integrated all their comments. It was just as nasty as peer review in real science. It would come back to me and I'd say, okay, but you just upped the reading level, so now I have to edit this again. So, and I would say these tend to occur more in state and federal institutions where they actually have experts and it's in the contract, you have to send it to them. So the hardest one was probably the dams, just because you had not only all the science, very good science, but there's also politics. So to that client's credit, they did not let the politics dilute the science in any way. But yeah, that was probably one of the hard ones.
Interesting. Have you guys done, Sebastian or Eunice, done anything with like taking a really complicated topic and making it very approachable and easy? Just in your experience, just curious.
I've certainly been involved with some things like that. Not in any organization like official enough to really have the end product be high quality. But I know that it is a big struggle, and I love looking at people's signage and like the information that like museums or places like that, what they put up. Did they put up like 10 paragraphs of like detailed information that nobody's gonna read through, or did they give a nice like concise summary of things to remember? And I always keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, I think I might have done similar thing in my intro to astronomy class. So as we know that the universe is like mysterious and it's so big and it's so, on a large scale that we cannot basically fit it in just an introductory course without compromising on some of the details. So, I mean, I had to, and even the textbook that I was following, we had to make things kind of simpler, kind of on a lower scale, kind of easier to understand to the younger students who were taking an astronomy course for the first time. But I mean, I feel like in that case we didn't have any other option. So I feel like if somebody was more interested in getting to know more about the universe, they can then take more advanced courses, or they can basically read on their own to get a more clear or a more detailed idea, I would say.
Jeremy, I thought of a better one. I'm so sorry.
Go for it.
Ice cores. So the way that we actually use ice cores to study climate change is you get gas bubbles and you study isotopes either in the water or the gas bubbles in the ice core. And these things can be kilometers long. They're huge. So we had a penguin exhibit that we were doing that had an ice core, and we only had 6 feet. So one way we got around this was multimedia. So we had a replica of the ice core with a cool LED light behind it and a scanner object that you could move left or right that was hooked to a computer and a screen that would give you information about different points on the ice core just by moving it. So multimedia, I think, is a really great way to take these super complicated things and make them accessible. Because everyone loved moving the little sensor along the ice core and getting all the different information about it. And I had a little video up above it and maybe like not even 2 paragraphs of text. Try explaining stable isotope analysis in 2 sentences. But so that was a much better example.
Nice. Yeah, I went to the Field Museum a few weeks ago over spring break when I was in Chicago, and just some of the cool exhibits, the hands-on stuff they had for kids, I was even excited about. Like, there's an irrigation exhibit where, like, you get to, like, turn these little knobs to, like, make hills and valleys and stuff, and then press the button, and a bunch of marbles fall down, and based on, like, how you structured the land, like, more of the marbles go into, like, you know, this area or this area, and it kind of teaches kids about, like, okay, like, the land is shaped a certain way to prevent all of the water from coming everywhere. So I thought that was super cool, and there's a lot of great examples of that in exhibits that were kind of really interactive for kids. So as we wrap up, I have one sort of more general question to finish the show with, and that is, Sebastian mentioned at the beginning of the discussion this topic of science communication, and that there are people very specialized to convey these complicated science topics to the public or to the kids, et cetera, et cetera. But as ourselves, as scientists, naturalists, aspiring naturalists, all that stuff, do we have any obligation to do that? Or is that simply we just let them take care of that? Are we kind of in our ivory, I don't say in a way, are we in our ivory towers just doing our own thing and someone else's job is to do that? Or should we have a stake in that? Is that important for us? Is that important for you, the individual, I mean? If it's not, it's not. If it is, it is. I'm just curious.
I think, you know, some scientists make really good communicators, and some scientists are absolutely terrible at communicating and probably shouldn't be responsible for communicating their subject to the world. And I think it comes down to the individual person. What can you do? And if you think you can contribute to teaching people about it, if it's like on a national scale, or if it's like teaching your neighbor about, you know, the plants in the backyard, I think everybody, I don't know anybody who's a nature nerd like us who would turn down an opportunity to do that. And I think I'm proud to say that we would all go out of our way to explain something nerdy if somebody had the opportunity. So I think saying no just isn't a thing that we would do, you know, given the chance.
I think I totally resonate with that. We should be willing to, and we should be happy, and I think most of us are willing and happy to do that. The only thing is we should do it more like consciously. So anyone we interact with, like if somebody asks us a question, we should give them more detail, and we should even give them, like, at a conference I met a guy who was interested in comets, and then like basically we didn't have much time to talk, so I had to give him his, I had to ask him for his email address, and then I sent him a lot of these easy to understand papers on comets. So I feel like, as Sebastian mentioned, we definitely, most of us at least, go out of our way to get our message across, and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree that you need to play to your strengths. If you are not great at writing museum labels or interviewing, don't communicate in those ways. But if you're the sort of person that can take a super interested kid through a museum collection and they want to hear all the scientific names and hang out with the scientists, do that. So I do think playing to your strengths is important, and I do think we have an obligation to find those strengths and do what we can where we can.
Okay. Yeah, my, I guess, gut reaction is I think everyone, whether they begrudgingly want to or not, should. similarly to things like voting or being informed about what's going on in your country, I think science communication is something that everyone should be involved in, regardless if they want. Well, not like you're going to drag them kicking and screaming, but I think being able to boil down difficult concepts into not necessarily interesting, but digestible way for an audience is very important. I think some people just want to kind of do their science and do their own thing, but I think the way you make change, this is my personal opinion, the way you make change in the world is by communicating that information to somebody. And maybe, they don't get every ounce of it, but if they get even a pebble of it and they understand it, that informs how they see the world or make better change for, whether that's voting on an environmental issue or making a green change or something like that. I think that's worth it. That's just my 2 cents. Any final thoughts on science and disinterest or anything like that as we wrap up? Alrighty. Well, that is going to wrap up our show this week. Thank you so much out there for listening to us once again this week. I want to thank Becky. I want to thank Sebastian. I want to thank Eunice. And that is going to wrap up the show. Next week, we will be back with more Science and Nature show. I don't know what the topic will be. It might come to me over the weekend when I watch another mockumentary. We'll see. But tune in next week at 6 o'clock Central Time to find out. Until then, we will see you all next week. My name is Jeremy Howard, and we're out.